Life of Dr. David Livingston, 18. Now it's certain that in acquiring his prodigious influence over either the Bakawanes or the Makololo, Dr. Livingston preached and prayed on all proper occasions, and no one has a higher appreciation of the efficacy of preaching and praying. He did more. He taught the people how to build houses, how to mend wagons, how to do 1,000 little things whereby they would be made more comfortable. Thus, by degrees, their minds were opened to receive the truth that the ways of civilization are good, and one by one, old prejudices were eradicated, old errors were abandoned, and the power of truth and justice more and more acknowledged. It's probable that since the advent of Livingston among them, the Bakawanes and Makololo have progressed as much in government, trade, agriculture as the Saxons of England did during several generations after the Battle of Hastings. Had he devoted himself strictly to religious teaching, no such result could have taken place. The genius of common sense gave him a notable triumph, and let it never be forgotten that common sense ought ever to be regarded as one of the best of the Christian graces. To go without this is to a heathen land. To go without this to a heathen land is simply to cast pearls before swine. Another fact that ought to be considered in any candid review of the explorer missionary's labor in South Africa is his evident comprehension of the whole situation. He not only considered Africa from the Christian point of view, speaking here in somewhat of a technical sense, but he looked upon it as a field also for humanitarian efforts, for scientific researches, for investigations of all kinds whereby the sum of knowledge might be increased, for the spread of commercial relations with other peoples, for advance of knowledge of political economy. Hence he had no qualms of conscience about leaving his Bakawane friends to look out for themselves for a season while he should undertake a journey to the interior. And he discovered Lake Ngami, whereby his power as a missionary preacher was in no degree increased, but his influence over the world of letters and science was. So too his discovery of the Zambezi River in the central portion of South Africa greatly aided in making his character respected by many leading minds of the world, who by this means were led first to have respect for missionaries, and then for the cause which missionaries represented. Many a fine mind in Christendom, which had thought of the Africans as Cuvier might have thought of rhinoceros, Agassiz of the Megatherium, or Colonel Foster of a mound builder. Through these discoveries was thus to reflect at least upon the importance of not the duty of preventing such vast masses of humanity as lived round the lakes and along the magnificent rivers of Africa from going to waste. Thus Christianity received a valuable reinforcement of allies, if not of devotees. Patience in great degree is perhaps possessed only by the extraordinary minds. It enabled Dr. Livingston, having opened the way for civilization in Africa, to continue his explorations in other portions of the continent, with sublime confidence that the present and future would take all practicable advantages of the past. It thus happened as a consequence of his comprehensive views and his sublime patience, not only that men of letters and scientific servants everywhere became interested in Africa, in addition to the various organized Christian societies for the spread of the gospel in heathen lands, but the spirit of commercial enterprise was aroused in that behalf, and the Christian church, the literati, including herein the newspaper press, the devotees of science, have vast influence in the world. But when these are reinforced by what we call the commercial world, they are sure not only to carry the war for civilization, progress, and profit into Africa, but through it, and bring to development all the resources of the people and the country. We know nothing that can stand against a cause sustained by the prayers of the Christian Church and supported by the power of the men on change. This threefold character of Dr. Livingston's labors and explorations in Africa as a demonstration of his remarkable genius. He had been only a missionary. Had he only been a missionary, his work might have demonstrated his personal piety and been long remembered by religious societies. Had he been only a missionary and scientific explorer, he might have been long highly esteemed by both religious and learned bodies. Being a missionary, a scientific explorer, and a man thoroughly acquainted with the necessities, the wants, and the enterprising spirit of the commercial world, he drew to the field of his labors the hearty interests of those mighty powers which, when allied together, never have known and never will know such word as fail. America would perhaps be hardly better known than Africa today, and the conversion of the Aborigines an only motive impelling to the exploration of the country. Now that the natural agricultural, manufacturing, and mineral resources of the country of the black man have become known, and the spirits of Christian propagandism, of intellectual progress, and of commercial enterprise have been aroused in behalf of that continent, there can be no reasonable doubt that its progress during the coming few years will be greater than that of the past 100 generations. Such it cannot be questioned is but a fair outline of the general character of the great explorer missionary work in Africa, and a justifiable prophecy of the probable results. Those whose labors are purely intellectual, and these in all ages have been, upon the whole, the greatest benefactors of mankind, are apt to underestimate the genius of those whom we generally call men of action. Dr. Livingston is a man of action, not only but one whose whole life has been that of exceeding hard work. Bodily and intellectually, he has ever been a working man. His labors in Africa, extending over a period of 16 years, included moral instruction, medical attention, mechanical pursuits, scientific researches, astronomical observations, and a series of explorations in an unknown country and among savage, barbarous tribes, without a parallel, perhaps, all things considered, in all authentic history of personal adventure. When he went to South Africa in 1840, the vast interior was wholly unknown. In the northern part of South Africa, on the west coast, there were a number of Portuguese settlements along the coast for several hundred miles and inland for some 200 or 300. The natives were semi-subject to this foreign power. The trade of the country was principally in slaves and ivory. Below this expanse, known on the maps as Lower Guinea, the coast appeared to be a vast extent of bleak and barren desert. South of the Orange River and extending here across the continent, and on the east side, still farther north, was a collection of English and Dutch colonies and provinces under somewhat civilized native government, all being more or less under the influence of the British of Cape Colony, the largest of all. Stretching northward along the east coast were Mozambique and Zanzibar under Portuguese and Mohammedan rule, but inhabited by tribes who were discontented and warlike. These portions of the east coast had long been in a state of decadence, a melancholy fact which was in large measure owing, as shown by Dr. Livingston himself when speaking of the ruins of Zumbo, Tete, and Senna on the eastern Zambezi, to the prevalence of the slave trade. As to the vast interior of the continental rim, all was unknown or conjecture. except here and there a spot where a missionary had established a station, and whence had irradiated some rays of knowledge to the outside world, such as the situation of South Africa when Dr. Livingston, in full vigor of young manhood, appeared upon the scene, a recently graduated physician and a humble missionary. He soon proceeded about 1,000 miles into the interior, and learning the language of the people who inhabited the wide expanse of the country, established a missionary station. By a genuinely philosophical and liberal comprehensive plan of education, he gradually brought this people to adopt many of the most beneficent rules and practices of civilization. Before he left Africa, it could not with truth be said that they were a barbarous people. Meantime, he had crossed the great desert of Kalahari and discovered Lake Ngami and the Zambezi River in the center of South Africa. The contributions thus made to the geographical knowledge of the world have been universally and generously recognized, as have been also by the scientific his contributions in botany, geology, natural history. This journey, by different routes, was made several times, and it is not improbable that his suggestion of obtaining water, the only want of this desert, wonderfully prolific in grasses and animals which require little water, by means of artesian wells, may result in reclaiming a vast expanse of cultivation and wealth. The journey from Cape Town to St. Paul de Lunda, particularly the portion of it between the region of Lake Ngami and the Portuguese colony, must be regarded as a momentous undertaking, with results at the time and to come of the greatest importance. By this journey he traversed some 31 degrees of latitude and about 15 degrees of longitude. The route in general was in the shape of an arc of immense circle, and the journey could not have been much less than 3,000 miles in length, remaining a considerable period among the Mokololo, a great people numbering many tribes inhabiting the central portion of South Africa from Lake Ngami on the south, nearly to the confluence of the Liba and the Liambai on the north, and a corresponding distance east to west, a district about as large as France. He became greatly influential among them, and was the means of great benefiting of their condition. It was in the country of the Mokololo that Dr. Livingston discovered the Zambezi, with the great falls of Ganye and the wonderful cataract of Victoria. Between here and the limits of the Portuguese power, he discovered vast plains for many weeks of the year covered with water, and then with beautiful flowers, thick in grass. Here, too, he found a river, part to whose waters sought outlet in the Indian Ocean and part in the Atlantic. He discovered that Lake Dailolo was the watershed between the two oceans, for vast distances on either side, the general elevation of the country beyond the immense flat plains of the midst of which is Dailolo is thousands of feet higher than that at the watershed. Hence he practically discovered that the general form of this great portion of Africa was that of an immense basin, with crevices here and there for the escape of the water through the rims to the sea. This practical discovery was not made, however, until Dr. Livingston had, through incredible difficulties, reached the seashore on the east coast, and was returning again on his journey across the continent. This journey, of which we have just given a rapid sketch, traversed 25 degrees of longitude. It was in distance traveled about 2,000 miles, and as the one from Linyanti, the capital of the Mokololo, to Luanda, the capital of Portuguese Angola, demonstrated the practicability of a route to the ocean on the west, so did this in the opposite direction. When therefore Dr. Livingston reached the delta of the Zambezi, he had shown by his own explorations that journeys could be made to central South Africa from the east, the west, and the south. He had become acquainted with a large number of tribes, about all of whom were addicted to polygamy, some to repulsive customs and superstitions, idolatrous rites, and degrading beliefs. He found many of these people who had large herds of cattle and who, in a rude way, gave considerable attention to agriculture. Many were little inclined either to superstition or to religion. Few had any notion of trade until he himself taught them by precept and example what it was. He had discovered several lakes and beautiful rivers, immense level plains of great fertility, many lovely valleys capable of producing heavy crops of grain. He had discovered several deposits of coal and had visited gold washings which might again be profitable. Portions of the country are without forest. Others are covered with trees, some of which are the largest and most majestic in the world. Thus, in his travels of more than 9,000 miles, the great explorer had taught scholars how to make geographical and geological maps of a very large portion of the globe. He had interested in its people and in its growth and development, the efforts of the Christian, the learned, and the commercial public. Those efforts, in the nature of things, will not cease until the continent shall everywhere become the abode of the friends of civilization and progress, and the scene of many of their permanent and beneficent triumphs. Surely, if man ever deserved rest from his labors, Dr. Livingston now did. The end of chapter 6.